So this is not a Cloud 101 briefing, but I do find it's important to at least level set everybody a little bit. You've all probably heard of the cloud. So what is the cloud? So when we talk about cloud computing, we're up here, we're going to go based on sort of the NIST definition of the cloud. And that is those three categories you may have heard about: IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. So infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. So that's sort of the NIST definition is our baseline as what is cloud. So that's sort of the geeky definition. Sort of bringing that down, when you think of the cloud, think of sort of the electric utility grid. How do we make computing invisible, right? So when you say the electric computing grid, when you go plug in a device, you don't say, where does that electricity come from? How is it generated? What is all the technology behind you don't care about any of that. You just say, give me electricity, I want as much or as little as I want, and then bill me with whatever I used. Same thing with the cloud, but for computing resources. That elasticity is probably the key thing. So quickly then, that's what the cloud is. Now let's go on. The format of the panel, you're going to break it down into three parts. The first part, I'm going to have each panelist introduce themselves and maybe talk about either their biggest challenge or a success story. Second part, I'm going to ask a set of questions. And then the last part, you guys will have the opportunity to ask some questions. All right, so let's jump right in. I'd like each of the panelists, please go ahead and introduce yourself and either give us a success story or the biggest challenge you're facing right now. Gary?
So I'm Gary Bartlett. I'm the CIO for the Office of the Inspector General for the United States Postal Service. I've been in the job about 5 years. Prior to that, 20 years retired Air Force. Big success is we've actually started our migration to the cloud, which was a big challenge for the agency as I showed up and they said, what's the cloud? And after a 20-minute lecture on the NIST definition, I decided to go to something simple that just said, I'm going to make your data center disappear. And they seemed to be okay with that because they were tired of paying the electric bill for the data center. So that seemed to ring with them, and so I went with it. The biggest challenge that, as I'm alluding to here, that we faced is just the culture. Dealing with two facets of it. One was just from a customer perspective and trying to get them to understand that we were going to have to change the way we did business. Things weren't going to be customized to their every whim anymore. There was going to be times where I was going to tell them it's broke or not available, and I can't explain why because the vendor doesn't provide it, and I can't provide it for you because I don't do that anymore. But honestly, the bigger challenge that I had was with my own staff. Getting a IT shop who had been doing the same things the same way pretty much since that agency had been founded, and getting them to understand that I was going to significantly change the way that they did business and take a lot of things away from them. When I got there, I lovingly referred to them as my Christmas tree technicians. And I say that because I told them that the way that they always explained their job to me, and I knew this to be true, is they would worry about walking into a server room and see a bunch of blinking red and green lights. Red lights were bad, green lights were good, and their job was to turn red lights green. And they seemed to think that that was the extent of their job, and as long as they did that, then everything else after that was great. Despite the fact that green lights didn't necessarily mean anything to the customer, as long as they kept those green lights blinking green, they were pretty happy with themselves. And I told them I was going to make all the lights go away. And then I was going to make their data center go away, and I was going to significantly change the way that they did their job. I actually won over the agency, my customers in the agency, faster than I did my own staff. It just took a while. It took a while to get them on board. I can honestly say I've got most of them on board. I still have my holdouts. I will have my holdouts until they decide to go work somewhere else, I'm sure. But that was honestly the biggest challenge, was that culture challenge, both in the agency, for my customers in general, and getting them to understand some of the capabilities that I was about to unleash on them. They're really about to experience it as I'm lighting them up in Office 365 starting next week, or I'm sorry, the week after. So they're really, I've got all my test users in. They're in love with me now because they really get it. So I can't wait to have a couple of thousand people in love with me. It'll really do my ego some good. And my own staff is really starting to figure out the fact that things are really a lot easier, and really their job has just significantly changed to the point where they're not worried about the boxes anymore. They're more worried about delivering services and capabilities to our organization. So I'd say that was the biggest challenge.
Great. Frank?
I'm Frank Konechny, the Air Force CTO. I've been in the job for about 7 years now. My job is basically to try to inject innovation into the Air Force. And migration, cloud migration, is one of those innovations that we're supposed to inject. And we've done pretty good so far. We have 2 software as a service solutions already. One is for personnel and the other one's Office 365. And we're enlarging the Office 365 right now, so we're progressing that way. We also have been pushing out using platform as a service in some experiments to see exactly what the platforms are going to provide to us as opposed to actually bringing everything. And we're also moving things infrastructure as a service as well. So we're going all 3 already because we want to get out of, Air Force wants to get out of the business of actually doing the work itself. We want to outsource all the work. And the main reason is because we don't have enough airmen. Airmen are supposed to be doing mission, they're not supposed to be doing let's say commoditized networking and commoditized computer processing capabilities. And so as we go down the path, we want to push more and more out. For instance, this week we're going to be pushing 150 outward-facing applications out to the cloud. That's the goal for this week, 150. We have 800 to actually push out to the cloud. And what's worse than that, we also have 3,000 applications that we eventually have to move out to a cloud. That's a little messier because a lot of those are real live operating applications that are mission critical at certain places. But our cloud is kind of big. Our cloud is basically commercial cloud, it's DoD cloud, it's the cloud that's sitting on the Air Force bases. So we're going to go virtualized across the Air Force. And we want to do that for lots of reasons, mainly for resiliency. But the real success story that's happening lately for us is with the Air Operations Center. We're actually doing a DevOps model. This is one of the first DevOps models that we actually pushed out that actually would do a mission critical application. And that mission critical application is basically the scheduling of the tankers for refueling. Now this is kind of interesting, and Gary may remember this, maybe not, that this was a whiteboard exercise. They did not have any real automation except for Excel. That was their automation. And so they said, let's figure this out. Let's do a true start from scratch DevOps model. They actually used airmen and commercial vendors to work together to actually generate a model. Actually do this, has been pushed into the Air Operations Center right now. It's operational, it's in multiple Air Operations Centers. They're going to another version of this now, which is going to be faster because it's going to build on the current one and add more capabilities to what they're doing in terms of how are you going to schedule aircraft now based upon the refueling schedules and everything else. So it's going to be more of a synergistic model effort down the path. And we're doing this faster now. We're actually getting to the point of almost having a ATO, authority to operate, within a week or so. Because we're using the base that we have to say, here's all our controls that we have for our RMF, and we're not changing the base controls. We're actually looking at how we can do this better in terms of CM and everything else, and it's all automated process. And so we're trying to get to a totally automated process to actually generate code now. And that's probably our best success story. We're actually progressing down that path. Now, if I can get that to do for the other 3,000 applications, it'd be really great. But, one application is fine to start. It's a good model. It's been working. Everybody's agreed it actually worked well, and they're going out for another, round of these now. In fact, we're probably doing 5 different applications now in parallel to see if we can actually upscale it to actually do a production level capability.
So Frank, just to clarify, that application is totally developed in the cloud. Is that correct?
Totally developed in the cloud.
Gotcha. And that would be considered, for the audience, that's a cloud native application.
Yes, that's one of the many. That's the first really cloud native application, I guess.
Gotcha. Great. Ed?
Hi, my name is Ed Simcox, and I am the Deputy CTO for Health and Human Services. And I've been in the role for all of 4.5 months. And so my background is that the first half of my career was spent inside of large hospital systems, doing work for CFOs and CIOs, and I held the role of CTO, during that time. And then the second half was working for systems integrators and service providers that actually called on large healthcare systems. So again, I've been in this job for 4.5 months, and I'm learning a lot. And it's been a pleasant surprise. I've been going out and doing listening tours inside of our divisions. So many of you know Health and Human Services is the largest civilian department. It's over $1 trillion in budget. We have 26 operating divisions, such as the National Institutes of Health, Food and Drug Administration, Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta, and many more that you're probably aware of. As I've gone around, I have found some amazing pockets of innovation and some amazing success stories around cloud. So I thought what I would do is tell you a success story, and I think during some of the Q&A, we can kind of tease out some of the issues that we face as well. But genomics. Genomics is a really, really big deal. It's a game changer type of science and technology endeavor to really improve the health of people, right? So some of you probably heard of precision medicine, and genomics is really the tip of the spear, as far as that's concerned. And we have a lot of stovepipe data inside of our agencies. We have thousands of systems, thousands of databases, and there are multiple reasons for that. Number one, there are legal and regulatory reasons why systems are kind of cordoned off traditionally from other systems, right? Then there are cultural reasons, right, and historical reasons why that happens. And then there are financial reasons why. So if an investigator, for instance, or a scientist goes and gets a grant, an NIH grant, for instance, are they necessarily thinking about how they can make whatever system they develop or the database that they create interoperable with everything else that's out there? Not necessarily. The money that's been earmarked for their research probably doesn't have a lot of room in it to take those kinds of things under consideration, right? So while there are great pockets of innovation and everything, it's been stovepiped. It's been quite stovepiped. So what we're doing is we're looking at opportunities where we can raise awareness about this and create better value and solve problems for folks. And genomics is a perfect area where cloud, especially hyperscale cloud, can really lend a lot of value. So thought what I would do is just share really quickly here a little bit about genomic data. So there was a study and subsequent journal article that came out recently, and what they were doing is looking at 4 of the largest data sets of types of data out there. So the first one was they looked at astronomy data, and then the second one, interestingly enough, was YouTube. The third was Twitter, and they're looking at Twitter not present day, but what it's going to look like in the future, okay? And then the last one was genomic data. And what they were looking at is what, how big is the data now and how is the data used now versus what it will be in 2025. And what they found out was, that at current growth rates, the genomic data that we have is going to completely eclipse, no pun intended, astronomy data and all, and those other data sets, to the point where they're saying it could be up to 40 exabytes of data by the year 2025. So that's 1 million terabytes. 1 million terabytes of information. And not only do we have to have a place to store that, right, but the use of genomic data to solve big medical problems and public health problems requires a lot of compute. Okay, so it's not just about getting the data in the cloud or getting access to the data. It's also about how we give compute access to the data. How do we give people access to the data so they can make secondary use or secondary value from that data? So this requires a hyperscale type solution, right? It's not something that we can no longer look at this as an enterprise issue, where we can set up large monolithic supercompute type environments and expect that that's going to be sustainable and scalable into the future. And so we're trying to turn the corner, and we have a really fascinating project going on right now that's being funded by the National Institutes of Health, and it's called GTEx, and the URL is gtex.org. portal.org. If you're interested in seeing it, you can go out there and actually see genomic data and other related data sets and their visualizations today.
So, I just wanted to ask to interject a little bit. So would you say, Ed, that relating to that, but big data is a key driver in terms of cloud adoption?
Yeah, in this particular case,
okay,
absolutely. So you got, so genomics data is what they call the four-headed beast. It's data acquisition, getting the data where it needs to reside. It's the storage of it. It's the distribution of it, and then finally, where we see a lot of value is in the analysis, in the analytics of it. And all four of those things have to be cared for with these huge data sets.
Great. Thank you. George?
Hi, my name is George Camus. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for ForcePoint Global Governments, located here in Herndon, Virginia. And I'm going to talk about cloud in a different lens. I'm a vendor. Well, my panelists, my colleagues here are all government, even though I was a government employee for 11 years, but that was back in the days of the CompuSec and ComSec and InfoSec days, so a lot of things have changed. My tenure in the private sector has been about 25 years, primarily in cybersecurity and in particular cross-domain solutions. At ForcePoint, we provide a wide variety of cyber solutions, not only to the federal government, but to the commercial sector. We're a relatively new named company. Our name's been with us for about 2 years, but we have a long lineage of about 20 years in certain key areas of cybersecurity. We have 4 business units. I'm in the global governments business, which primarily focuses on cross-domain technology, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second when it comes to the cloud. Insider threat. We also have a network business unit focusing on firewall technology, next generation firewalls. So we have that runs in the cloud, both Azure, AWS, but also on-prem. And cloud security capabilities for email, web. And last but not least, data and insider threat. We have very robust data loss prevention capabilities and also insider threat technology. So all that coupled together, we can put a lot of really neat cybersecurity capabilities together and give you a complete solution. So how does that all map into the cloud, right? Your question. And in particular, what are some of the things we've been working on and some of the challenges that we have faced? So I'd like to address that 2 ways. One, from a vendor point of view, and then also what we're seeing in our customer base. As a vendor, we're moving over to the cloud. A number of our products are cloud capable. We have a cloud access security broker, which can broker all requests that we make to the cloud for check for security and so forth. It's available on the cloud. But we're adopting Microsoft Office 365. And we have 2 parts of ForcePoint that are part of one ForcePoint, but we're somewhat disconnected because we have a federal group that builds cross-domain technology and insider threat technology that's ITAR controlled. And because of that, we have to isolate that whole working group, the development of that code, everything that we do around that from the rest of our corporate infrastructure, which consists of 4,500 people around the world in 55 different locations. So going to Office 365, we're doing that in the commercial side, just right in the commercial Office 365 Azure Cloud. But on the global government side, we're going into the Office Azure Cloud at the IL4 level, right? High, FedRAMP high. And the challenge that I'm facing and we're facing is that we got 2 instances of O365, 2 instances of Skype, 2 instances of Active Directory. How do we communicate? Because before I used to be able to get free busy of my colleagues in the commercial space. I used to be able to chat with them via link, do video conferencing and so forth. All that's going away, so how do I provide that connectivity? And I'll circle back to that. We also see that problem in our customer base, dealing with our government customers. We talk about the cloud. It's not one big cloud. It's almost the sky with lots of clouds. We have...
Hey, Air Force Sky.
Yeah, Air Force Sky. And if you look out there today, there's hundreds of clouds, and that's the way it is, especially in the federal market. We have a top secret SEI cloud. known as C2S, just as built in the cloud. We have a unclassified cloud for official use only, ITAR, et cetera. Then we have multiple other program clouds. And the challenge that our customers are facing is those are all discrete, separate clouds, protected because of security reasons or sensitivity levels or other reasons. But how do we provide the secure interconnectivity of those clouds? If they're at the same security level, we can use firewall technology. But if they're at different classification levels, we need to leverage cross-domain solutions to do that. And as a provider of cross-domain solutions, I help enable that. And being on that thread, circling back to our corporate challenge, we're looking at even using, drinking our own champagne, as we call it, and using some of our cross-domain solutions to solve that IL4 instance of our data with our commercial instance and being able to inspect that data very closely as it gets interchanged between the domains.
Okay,
That's it.
thank you. So we heard a lot of good things. Heard problem side, cultural challenges to adoption. On the plus side, we heard things like need to drive innovation, want to develop cloud native applications, and big data as a driver for cloud adoption. So let me jump into a few questions. I'm going to pose these questions to the entire panel, and anybody on the panel, if you have the answer, just jump right in. So, in fact, in the brochure, you saw that cloud adoption for the federal government lags behind in the private sector, right? Why is that? Why are the feds slower than the private sector? So if you look at, just do a scan of articles out there, you'll see many articles cite cloud security as the biggest hurdle for federal adoption. Do you share this concern? There's a two-part question. Do you share this concern? If not, what have you or your vendors done to alleviate that concern? Anybody?
Well, I'll start. It's easy.
Okay.
Yes, the first answer, yes, we're concerned about security. That's why we have various...
This is the softball part of the session.
Yeah.
We'll get it fast. We'll get it.
That's why I have various data levels for the cloud. So we have, if you guys know, we have level 2 for outward-facing websites. We have 3, 4, and 5 for, well, not 3 anymore. We talked about bringing 3 back, by the way. 4 and 5, basically for operational issues, operational systems, whatever. They have to go through FedRAMP certification, then they have to go through another certification that DISA provides to give a preliminary ATO. And so we trying to push a lot more things into what it means to be certified to be a cloud vendor for DoD. We're also putting now on top of that a security architecture that we can buy or get from DISA. It consists of the CAP, which is the Common Access Point, or Cloud Access Point. Basically, that's a defensive mechanism to prevent things from the commercial cloud, the ILS 5.4 cloud, actually sending things back into the DoDN, as well as securing some of the parameters of the CSSP. Well, that's a cybersecurity service provider. It's mainly what criteria, what information they get from the cloud, and how we actually work with it. So we have put in a lot of safeguards into a cloud already. Now, it doesn't mean that per se, the cloud vendors don't, cloud vendors have their own safeguards. And we can actually we can put in a website or whatever that can be totally open and can be evaded. In fact, we already had that incident happen. That somebody forgot to change the passwords for the file servers and things, and people got in there and they started broadcasting things. That's common knowledge. But nothing was really there. It was just set up to be an ad hoc environment to start experimenting with. So nothing was, breached or anything about that. It was just that people have to be very careful when they do that. So on top of this, we put in various controls to actually ensure that everything gets done correctly. And so that's what we're doing. So again, we are paranoid about security. And you'll see slow adoption because we are paranoid about security, and we're finally getting everything in place now to do this. And there's not that many vendors that have an IL5 cloud. This is something else.
Gotcha.
Can I take that from a vendor point of view?
Sure, go ahead.
So some of the difficulties is that, as Frank mentioned too, we got these multiple clouds and they run isolated. They have to go through the CAP. Many vendors build their products to run in the commercial cloud, which is the big market. and worldwide, and they depend on a lot of interconnectivity, licensing, threat updates, et cetera, which becomes difficult when you try to pull that capability off and put it into a private cloud. So you lose that threat information, you lose your licensing callback. But those are all adaptable, right? So vendors have to do that. But our biggest challenge from a vendor point of view is not only getting it into the marketplace, which I have to say, Amazon and Microsoft both, and just using them as examples, have both done a good job in helping to accelerate that. But getting capabilities or software as a service evaluated through the FedRAMP process. There's a number of FedRAMP providers, but to get your software in there, you have to get FedRAMP approved. And we run into the old chicken and egg problem where a vendor will have a nice capability, but they have to shop around and find a government customer that wants to sponsor that to bring it through and pay for some of the effort. The challenge with that is if you don't have a good connection with the federal government, your customers, you'll never get there. And then the other big challenge is, and we find this on the cross-domain side, is even though if you have a government customer that wants your capability, they may not have the cycles to do it, and so it doesn't get done. So we have to figure out some way to accelerate getting commercial products into the cloud so the government can better use those capabilities.
Excellent. So in fact, George, using your sky analogy, that there are lots of clouds, is cloud interoperability an important requirement for your cloud adoption?
So I'll start. So absolutely, for several reasons. Number one is, that dreaded fear of vendor lock, right? You want to get to a point where you don't have the option of getting some competition, trying to get good pricing, being able to use different clouds. Not all clouds are created equal necessarily. Different clouds have different specializations. So the ability to make it transparent to your customer and to the people that you support. That's one of the challenges that you face when you talk about all the different, the clouds that are built from security layers. They're not allowed to talk to each other. You can't pass information between the two. You heard George talking about that. You can't, when you start talking to some of the folks that you're trying to support, and you want to try to explain to them, oh, well, they're logged into that cloud, so you can't see if they're online or not. And these are people that go home and can see anybody in the world at any moment, on their phone as to whether or not they're available. And trying to explain to them, oh, well, it's because the clouds don't talk to each other. And then they look at you and go, what? It's supposed to make my life easier, not harder. What are you doing to me? So that interoperability, I think is huge, not just for providing service to your customers, but also just, again, to avoid vendor lock, that I should be able to move. It's my data. It's my information. If I want to move from cloud A to cloud B, I want to be able to move from cloud A to cloud B and not have to worry about the fact that there's so many things that are specialized and locked down that I can't do that, and it limits my flexibility.
Anybody else have any thoughts on cloud interoperability? Go ahead.
Cloud is it's a nascent, developing part of the industry, the IT industry. You and I were talking about the fact that there aren't good, solid standards, around things like interoperability and other things, right? So I think we have a lot of room for opportunity for improvement there and growth. And from my perspective, there are two things. There's security and then there's just acquisition. And we see people celebrating in our operational divisions the mere fact they were able to acquire small amounts of cloud resources. So I would encourage folks in industry, if you have success stories about how you helped your customers, your federal customers, get better at acquisition and more agile with acquisition, please share those. There are ways, right? But some of those ways are workarounds. And I think a lot of folks are starving for those best practices and success stories where they've been able to make it through the requisite processes and get real value from their cloud resources. So again, security and acquisition are big for us.
And I think this is a really, so thank you, Ed. That's one point though on cloud interoperability. So as Ed pointed out, the standards are lagging, right? I mean, you got to make a decision. You're going to go AWS, or you're going to go Azure, or you're going to go Google Cloud. So from the cloud vendors, we may not get the standards in a while. However, you can do things like microservices, web services, JSON, et cetera, that make it easier to move if you had to move from one cloud. And I think that's what, Gary, you were getting at.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, so moving on. Is your cloud adoption focused on new development, or are you migrating legacy applications and data to the cloud? Why or why not?
For us, yes. Yes, yes.
Yes on both?
Yes on both.
All right, I'm going to stop with the yes or no questions from now on.
So
Well,
Would you like to elaborate?
Okay, we talked about this. We have a certain amount of applications that we have to migrate. And the question is, do we start from scratch, or do we actually migrate those? There's lots of lift and shift theories around, but lift and shift doesn't really work half the time. And so a lot of times you have to rationalize, or you have to build a new application based upon that. And so there's lots of tools that we're actually using to do, look at the application, figure out what the business rules are actually coming out with, and then really do a cloud-based application based upon that. So I guess it's a combo, if you will. New from scratch, new from using a base business analysis tool that tells us what the business rules are and everything else, and then building it, and just pure migration of taking some of those things which are really cloud compatible, let's say maybe cloud ready, and just moving them to the cloud. So we do all three.
So from a vendor point of view, yes and yes. There was a blog that was put out about this, and I think they grabbed the quote from me in that if you don't move to the cloud, you'll be just left behind. So there's a huge push on the commercial sector to go to cloud, especially from a cybersecurity point of view. Companies don't want to have large IT staffs and large cybersecurity staffs, so they're pushing a lot of that out to the cloud. So we're highly incentivized to do that. And at the same time, we need to move those capabilities over into the government cloud to meet our government customers' requirements. And of course, there's separate certifications associated with that and separate challenges because of the disconnect, but it's something we have to do. And then, of course, planning in the future, we need to make sure that we're fully cloud ready and compliant as new technology comes out.
Great. And Frank, I want to segue off of that a little bit. I don't know if hopefully you audience caught that so that lift and shift, and you'll hear that a lot in terms of migration, right? I can just take your existing OS and apps layer, et cetera, and just lift it and throw it in the cloud, spin up those same types of OSs in the cloud, and boom, done. That's lift and shift. But Frank said that doesn't really work. So Frank, does that mean what, you focus more on hybrid approaches or do an assessment of what you can lift and shift? Is there a strategy there?
The strategy is for everything. We do an engineering analysis of the application itself, because you have to know not only what's in the application, what characteristics it has, what COTS tools it's been using, like the web server and everything else. And you also have to figure out what data connectivity it has to other applications. Because the worst thing you want to do is move an application out there that has to connect to 5 other applications and 5 other clouds, because you'll be eating your lunch when you have to do all the data movement, and it'll be delays and it'll cost money. So we do a complete engineering analysis before we actually migrate an application, and then determine which cloud you really want to put it in. And this is very important to us to determine that at the beginning. And and we want interoperability, obviously, because when we find that we move it to and remember, this is an iterative process. This is not a slam dunk, I know every application we have today and I'm sure going to move them perfectly. This is an iterative thing that we may move an application to a particular cloud and then realize we want to really move 5 or 6 other applications and they're better suited in another cloud. We'd have to determine how we're going to move the first one into that other cloud to be within the same domain to actually work better with each other. So it's a give and take situation as we look at it, but the engineering analysis is a big deal.
Gotcha.
Something I'd like to throw out, since we have a room full of vendors here. Sometimes you either make that decision and that process easier or harder. And I mean, I've dealt with companies that when we start talking about and doing the analysis of what we want to do, sometimes they'll come in and say, hey, Gary, good news. We've got a cloud application that, a cloud version of what we're doing. And you say, great. And then it's basically a lift and shift of what you have into the cloud. That's not exactly what I was hoping you were going to tell me. And oh, by the way, it's twice as expensive because it's cloud, so we slapped a premium on it because it's cloud. So from a vendor perspective, right, sometimes you're an enabler in that, of making a decision of, I'm not going to lift and shift it, I'm just going to go replace it. And sometimes you can make that process easy or you can make that hard. And don't come back and when you come back and tell me, hey, it's going to be exactly the same way you're doing it today, but we're going to make it really complicated, and oh, by the way, it's going to be more expensive. You're really helping make up my mind, I can tell you. From a vendor perspective, I encourage you that your products and the services that you're selling need to be more in tune with the way the cloud is being advertised, and that elasticity and the flexibility that the cloud is supposed to provide us, and your products should adapt to those things and not ask us to adapt our cloud desires to your products.
Great point. So in the migrations I've done, usually it's a three-pronged strategy: assessment, architecture, and then action. So those first two, as the panelists brought up, are very, very important. Okay, are you interested in cloud computing to cut costs or leverage new cloud features like elasticity? Don't just answer yes or no. Which is more important to your organization?
Okay, for us it's resiliency. So it's more resiliency of the application itself rather than the cost, because we're mission-based, we're mission-focused. It'd be nice if we could save money. I mean, that's the initial going-in position, is, oh, you're going to save lots and lots of money. However, the end result is that we want more resiliency in our applications. We want to be able to surge, we want to be able to move, we want to be able to, if a particular cloud is attacked, we want to be able to move immediately to another cloud. I mean, this is the things we have to think about. And so it's really mission focused for us as opposed to cost focused, even though everybody says it's going to be less.
That's excellent. Others, go ahead.
One of the things that we coached our customers on when I was on your side of the table was to, look at what the priorities were for a particular app and a particular customer, and you got to look at better, faster, cheaper. Those are, I think, three ways that you can size up a cloud opportunity from both sides and help customers, figure out what's most important to them. I would say that for a lot of our systems, it's all three. We want to take advantage of all three of those. So better being resiliency, portability, standard ways, interoperability. Faster being better time to value for development projects, better time to value for lifts and shifts and new development. And of course, cheaper goes without saying. So, I'm hoping that we set a precedent, quickly, and a standard around better, faster, cheaper, and kind of create a three-pronged approach to analyzing all of our systems.
So I think the big push for the cloud is elasticity and being resistant to attack, being resiliency. I'm sorry, I tried to get the word out. We talked a little bit about cost. It's not real clear to me that there's going to be a big savings in cost. There might be savings in certain applications like O365, maintaining your email, your Microsoft Office type stuff. But I guess I have a concern that as we put big data and big applications out there in the cloud, it's going to make it really expensive. And if we don't leverage the core capabilities that Gary mentioned about elasticity and making use of all the cloud features, it's just going to cost. The cost is going to far outweigh the benefit.
In fact, I just for a small business, I just went through their cloud bill line by line to try to find them some savings. And with all the add-on services that vendors are continually rolling out, you can find things that cost you 2 or 3, 4 times the cost of just standing up a basic server. So the cost is not going to be cheaper, and it's not that easy to piece through. But I don't want to take up all the time here. I want to make sure you guys have an opportunity to ask questions. So let's switch gears. Let's get the mic going around. Do you have some questions? Yes, but wait for the mic, please. Is there somebody with a microphone? I thought there was, but we lost them. Go ahead, I'll repeat it.
So I have a question. I'm a reseller and I actually sell a lot of, different technologies, cloud and so forth here. But one of the things that I noticed is the complication of selling a cloud service. So you go from buy hardware to putting stuff in the cloud, and now you're consuming cloud service. And so it goes from doing a CapEx type of expenditure to a consumption model, and you can quickly exceed those thresholds. So you typically start with a balance and you subtract from it. And then it goes negative. So then you get to anti-efficiency issues. So, and I think Gary or somebody, one of the earlier people said something about this goes from, it's like a utility. So is there a way to handle billing and procurement as a service type of, as a utility versus buying it as a product?
So I'll start,
ahead,
if you don't
Gary.
mind. Within my agency, I spent a lot of time with my contracting officers and my budget folks. There's some hard and fast rules in the government when it comes to procurement, and then sometimes there's interpretation of rules that the lawyers and the contracting officers and the budget folks get into. So sitting down and having that education internally to my agency was critical. As we migrated to more of this OpEx, it's really baked into my budget. It's a per user monthly cost kind of thing, and working through how you work out from a budgeting perspective and how you justify that and how you avoid the Anti-Deficiency Act, parts of those conversations. And part of what we did is we told them and said, look, it's very much like electricity. You don't cut a contract for electricity and then say, oh, your electric bill was $2 higher than you projected, therefore it's an Anti-Deficiency Act. Type of thing. So for the agencies, a lot of that's a requirement. From the vendor perspectives, I would say a lot of that comes down to how you sell it. The vehicles that you have available, working to get vehicles in place that it's more. We're very used to time and material types of contracts when it comes to vendor hours, but not so much when it comes to services types of things, right? So getting creative about the kinds of contracts you make available. That are easier to explain to a contracting officer, that they understand that, hey, it's basically a consumption model. So that's what I would recommend.
Okay, I'll talk about it too, because we're affected by this every day. And we tried to push them into saying it was a utility, and they told us that since it's not a regulated utility, you can't actually do it as a utility. Yeah. And that's the bottom line. Now, there's some tricks you can play. You can obviously play a contract that starts in the middle of the year so that you can have funding, because what you don't want is a contract that ends at the end of the year, because you will find that you will run out of money before the end of the year and you won't be able to apply any more money. And so we're trying to do contracts that mid-year to mid-year based on the budget issues that we have, as well as having many CLINs on that contract that basically says, I'm going to deposit $5,000 more into that account, or $100,000, depending on how we determine, the usage factors would be. Because we know if it's not a website, we're going to be a surge capacity at some times. And so we have to allow for that surge capacity in the contracts. And so we've been playing with various contracting vehicles to just look at the best ways of doing things.
Excellent. Anybody else people have questions? All right, I'll jump in. Oh, go ahead.
Just a quick question on the cloud. Is the value for cloud for you, is it really the agility that you're looking for, or is it to get out of the data center business? So are you trying to get products and services out to your constituents or your mission, or are you trying to just get out of the data center business because it's hard?
It's not
hard, it's slow.
It's not hard. It's not slow. It just uses personnel that we don't have. So it's a training issue. If we had a permanent staff of people sitting there that could actually do this full time, and they were ITIL certified and all that stuff, cool. We don't. Unless I buy a contract to do this. That's what we're going to do. We're going to buy a contract to do this. We're going to say we want to do a COCO model for our data centers, and we want to buy services from every other data center that's out there. So that's where we're playing, and it's really for resiliency that we want to go virtualized. We've been going virtualized for a long time. I mean, we've had hundreds of apps virtualized at Hill Air Force Base for years, and also at PAC and some other places too. We know the benefits of virtualization and the resiliency and the surge protection we get from it. We just need to get into a model where we actually pay for it as opposed to using sunk costs.
So I can say for us, it's all about the agility. It's the very demanding customer base. No matter how fast or great you think your procurement process is, it still takes time. I've got to order servers. I got to wait for them. Oh, the vendor's backlog because it's the end of the year, so everybody ordered servers at the end of the year. So now I got to wait for the servers to show up. Then I got to build the servers. I've got staff to do that today, and they're perfectly content with building those servers. But it takes forever. Whereas now as I've gotten things into the cloud, I say I need servers, and they go, okay, it's ready. Now what do you want to do with it? And it changes the role that my shop gets to play with my business functionals. That they're not waiting on me. I'm waiting on them, telling me, okay, now we're ready. What do you want to do? As opposed to they're always waiting on me. So for us, it's very much about that agility because I maintain a data center today. I want to get out of the data center business, not because I don't like having a nice room with lots of racks and blinking lights, and it's not, it's always air conditioned, so I've always got a nice, cool place to go. But the reality is, I don't like the fact that my customer has to wait on me. I want to wait on the customer. I don't want the customer waiting on me.
So if you had a private cloud that you built yourself that had that same agility, that would solve that business problem.
It would solve that business problem, but from my perspective, and kind of to Frank's point, that's not the business I want to be in. I don't want to be running the boxes, right? Because quite honestly, and it kind of comes to, for what I'm paying for some of my people, whether they're contractors or FTEs, for what I'm paying, I want a higher order of business out of them. I want them doing things that are more worthy of the money that I'm paying them than doing things about, swapping hard drives and running network cables. And I mean, that's lower level work that I'd rather not be invested in and worrying about and trying to keep up with. So whether it was a private cloud that I had under my own control, I don't want to be in that business anymore.
That was excellent. I hope you guys caught that.
I'd like to add some.
Yes,
I'd like
go
to
ahead.
add something about that.
Sure.
You're absolutely right, getting out of business. But one thing we have to be careful of, and I've seen it on the commercial side, and not so much in the government side, was when you go into the cloud, it can get very expensive, especially when you're consuming large amounts of data. And working with a commercial company, I know a CISO there, they never went to the cloud. And this is a company that pays generates 1 in 4 people's paychecks, right? They process so much data on a monthly basis, they found that it's much cheaper and more robust to keep all that in-house. Although you have all these expenses, but the reality is sometimes it's better to keep it internal than to farm it out.
You have to have a hybrid. I've got
Absolutely.
They get an $8 million a month bill, and they go, whoa, we got to go back to having some of this in-house.
Mm-hmm.
We can't do it.
Yeah,
I understand what the government's trying to do to go into all cloud, but the reality is there's a balance there. There's some really good things about going to the cloud, being able to spin up systems quickly, not having to manage them, but there's a cost issue too.
I mean, we have lots of data too. I mean, we get tons and petabytes or nothing.
That's
And
the biggest lift and shift problem is how do I get the data out to that cloud?
well, and so we'll have a data cloud per se. I mean, that's what's going to happen. It's purely dedicated to data per se that we can commoditize enough of, as opposed to processing capability. And we've talked about this too, because we're getting more and more data, especially when we get IoT data coming in now from the aircraft and everything else. We have to put it someplace and we have to analyze it fast enough. And we get videos all the time, So it's a question of how fast can you actually download it and how fast can you actually process it. And we realized that I'm not going to send all this to Amazon. No.
Let me ask the panel before we have a few more minutes left. I want to make sure they answer this for you guys. So what 1 or 2 things should the audience take away from the session? Maybe if you guys can each give a shot at that.
So I think what you've heard all of us talk about is the fact that, number one, and this is no surprise to you, working with the government can be challenging. And a lot of times the vendors look at us from a government perspective and go, hey, you really need to adjust, you need to be flexible, you really need to think about doing your business a little bit differently. Unfortunately, there's a lot of times we don't have a choice in that, right? Lawyers have told us no, Congress has told us no, or put, hey, maybe in 10 years they'll lift some of the restrictions that we have on us. So I put it back to the vendors that say, you've got to figure out ways to help us be creative. You've got to figure out ways, contracting vehicles, you've got to look for ways to help us do business with you, and not just always look at us like we're the two-headed beast. Sometimes you just got to figure out a way to come up with two forks to feed us. That's the reality.
Great. Frank?
Well, basically what Gary said. But,
Two forks.
well,
Two forks.
I could take 3 forks. But we have the same problems as state. I mean, we're in the same issue. I mean, I need innovations from you guys. And I don't expect you to understand some of the problem spaces that we in the Air Force have. I just like to hear something that you think is a good idea that we could actually utilize. And I'll determine, or our team will determine exactly where it could be utilized, as opposed to saying, this not applicable. And you'd be surprised how many things I find is useful that you guys probably don't even think is useful, because we have, know the missions that we do. And a lot of these, we have to have agility and everything gets associated with it. So my job is to, if you got technology and you think it's really cool, let us know, because we will either say, yeah, it's really great, and we'll try to direct you to who in the Air Force can actually be the best source or provide you with the most information, or we will help you actually get on a contract. I mean, we set up DIUX basically to be a way of doing pilots and everything else on contract in a fast agility model. And we're trying to use it more and more now. In fact, you're going to see another agility model coming out of the Air Force, which is, I don't know what it's going to call it yet. We'll see. It's lots of names coming out, so you can't tell what the real name is yet. But it's going to be another model, because we have, especially from the research labs, we have ability to actually come out with contracts right away too. And so, in fact, we're actually using the research lab to test out various concepts in the cloud, various services that we want to be able to actually utilize later. And it's also not, they haven't been certified yet for the NIPR side. We find that if we get new innovation in, we want to test it first, and we'll test it in the research lab as opposed to any place else, and then we'll talk about putting it into NIPR and CIPR.
Okay, thank you. Ed?
Yeah, for me, kind of being new here, I would say, I've had a lot of folks, some folks in this room, want to meet and tell me about what they sell and everything, and I would say understand who our people are, understand our business, our missions, in our divisions, and understand our technology stacks before we have a meeting. And it'd be great if you can come in and say, did you know that you have this issue? Did you know that you have this technology that's no longer supported in your data centers or in your operations? Come embarrass me and tell me that. That's valuable to me. That tells me that you all are intellectually invested in what we're doing and you're adding value right away. And then after you get to know what we're all about, let's talk about business and mission. Let's not talk about speeds and feeds and cost, right? We can get to that. That will take care of itself once we kind of, define the business value, right? So start with the business and help me understand where we're deficient and how you might be able to help on that front.
And real quick, George?
So from vendor perspective, speaking for all the vendors here, we want to help the government go forward with the cloud-based architecture. Everyone that is in the software business is moving in that direction. Anything I ask of the government is help us help you. And right now, I see one of the biggest issues was certification, getting things FedRAMP approved, finding government sponsorship to do that. How do we streamline that? And I think there's a real need for that, especially talking to the folks from Amazon and also Microsoft. They're begging companies to get into the marketplace, to go through the various processes to help the government, or at least establish a marketplace in the government for them to use our technology. So help us help you.
Great. All right, I'd like to, everybody please thank our panelists. Thank you. Thank you, Arnie.